So here we go. So the class today and the class on Wednesday are a basic reminder that one of your best friends in taking this course actually is your Economics 101 textbook. If you've mastered that textbook, if you have it and you use it well, there's a lot in there. It's almost like that book that was written that said, everything I ever needed to know in life I learned by the second grade. Well, I'm not saying that what you learned in Economics 101 is second grade. I would never disparage you that way. But there's so much in there that's so rich. It provides such a great foundation. So I hope you never sold or got rid of your textbook. You will find it immensely useful to you. But what this is also a reminder of is that as we proceed through this course, as I've said to you many times, we are measuring the macroeconomy. There is a flood of data that comes out all the time. We call it high frequency data on employment and retail sales and inflation and GDP and housing starts and inventories and trade and the dollar, and goes on and on and on. Those data are what macroeconomists pay attention to, and how we maneuver around those data to interpret them is what determines whether or not we're good at what we do. And then if you want to be a star, you take those data and you find a way of forecasting with those data, saying, well, it's great to tell me what happened in December, but we're now in February. And you know what? Decisions have to be made. So I need to know what's going to happen next month, what's going to happen by the end of this year, what's likely to happen to the economy in 2022. How do I begin to think about making forecasts? You can't forecast unless you have data. And so we will be very data focused. But again, we're not using calculus here. We're not using, analytic geometry in any way. What we're doing is taking percentage changes, simple changes by subtracting one number from another, comparing last month's number to another. You know, the unemployment rate last month was X. What is it this month? Did it go up or did it go down? Sometimes it's just as simple as that. So that's who we are. But in doing that, we are going to use so much of what you learned in your introductory economics course. And in the process, we're going to be integrating finance, business, and politics into what we do. What we don't want to do is make assumptions about anything. There's a movie called Apollo 13, which is about the Apollo 13 space shot that went up, and there were problems with the spacecraft, and the three astronauts never made it to land on the moon. But there's a line in that movie where sort of the head of NASA's operations, he says, let's not make things worse by guessing. Work the problem. Don't make things worse by guessing. We don't want to guess. We don't want to assume. We want to measure. And when we measure and we measure accurately, we're able to draw accurate conclusions. I would have to say meteorology has come a long way. You know, when I was a child, and you got a snowstorm like we got today, they didn't have a clue how much snow was going to come down. Now we have all these really sophisticated models that work on really sophisticated algorithms. We measure so much better. In economics, we haven't come nearly as far, but believe me, we've come a long way. The models are great. The math is great, and we are generally able to forecast. But here's the thing. If you define economics, you might say, well, you know what? There is a Nobel Prize in economics science, so it must be a science. Well, I would argue it's not a science. It's a social study. And that's why in universities, economics departments are part of the social sciences area. And the reason is simple. It's people. We can't forecast accurately what people are going to do in response to something, especially in a crisis. You know, we gave stimulus checks to people and anticipated they were going to take that money and spend it like mad and prop up the economy. And some people did that because they were forced to. They were broke. Other people took that money and paid off their debts. Other people took that money and you know what they did? They bought stocks and bonds. Now, we knew that all three possibilities were there, but our ability to forecast exactly how people would divide up the three, spend it, pay down debt, save it and invest it. We didn't have a clue. We couldn't do it because of the human element. And because humans have never been through this kind of pandemic before, with a government that was willing to support us in a pandemic. We never saw that before. So human behavior mattered. We also don't want to commit what errors of logic, and that is one word that I don't ever want to use is the word should, which is a normative bias. You know what? If this happens and this happens and this happens, the economy should do this. Well, you know what? Shoulds don't happen. They don't. Shoulds don't happen because the way history evolves over time is exactly that. It's an evolution. It is not a repeat of the past. And so we don't ever want to use the word should and have a normative bias. But on the other hand, we don't want to extrapolate either and say, time and time again, when X happened, Y happened. So the next time X happens, Y is going to happen. Really? Really? You know, one of my favorite things, and I've written about this extensively, published articles on this, when you hear somebody say 9 out of 10 times when X happened, Y happened. And I don't ask why the 9 times out of 10 happened. I asked what happened on the 10th time that it didn't happen. What was different that time? Because it's entirely possible this time is different, and in fact, this time is always different. History doesn't repeat itself. It's always different. We don't want to anchor. We don't want to have a belief in something and take it to the death and say, we believe that every single time you make the federal budget deficit get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, you end up in inflation. That's anchoring in a belief. You know what? You can anchor in that belief and be totally wrong. Every single time the economy turns from a bad period to a good period, value stocks go up and growth stocks go down. Really? Well, tell that to the people who are invested in these small technology companies that have gone through the roof as the economy turned up. We don't want a data mine, which is, I have a conclusion and now I'm going to find evidence to prove it. That doesn't work either. That's terrible. Let the data tell you the conclusion. Don't start with a premise and then say, let me see if I can find data to prove it. That's data mining. The fallacy of composition, which is, if it's good for one, if everybody does it, it'll be good for everybody. Really? Okay. It might be good for everybody to get a coronavirus vaccine tomorrow, but if everybody showed up at a coronavirus vaccine place all at once, a lot of people are going to be waiting on long lines and never going to get it. It may be good for one to show up, but if everybody showed up on the same day, the lines would be a mile long and most people would just not get it. And I'll just skip ahead to the fallacy of single cause. Nothing happens just because of one thing. They rioted on January 6th and invaded the Capitol building because of a number of different things. It wasn't necessarily because perhaps what Trump said. People were angry for a lot of reasons. And they were expressing that anger. And you know what? A lot of those people might have shown up and done the same thing even if Trump had not said what he said. It's never a single cause. When we start getting inflation again, as my forecast holds, roughly, I don't know, a year and a half or so from now, it's not going to be because the money supply expanded too much or because of too much fiscal stimulus. It's going to be a lot of reasons why we're going to get inflation. It's not going to be a single cause. Next, we have to remember what's endogenous and what's exogenous. Whenever you see X, like exit, it means from the outside. Some things are affecting the economy from the outside, like the COVID virus is an exogenous shock to the economy. Like this snowfall is an exogenous shock to the economy. Look at all the people who are not going out and getting their coffee at Starbucks today, causing a loss of sales at Starbucks because they're home today. Now, they may go back tomorrow, but the sales loss today is gone. I mean, you can't make that up. That's exogenous. As opposed to what is endogenous, N, inside. What are the things from inside the system that are causing people to spend, to save, to invest, to hire, to fire. What's going on endogenously from within the system? That has nothing to do with a shock of any kind. We have to make that distinction. And we have to make distinctions about things that you learned about in Economics 101 and you've probably forgotten about already. And maybe you even heard about it in an incorrect way. And that's why I always start this bullet point with Say's law. I'm telling you, for this course that you are about to take, you must master Say's law. Now you might say, oh yeah, I remember that from Economics 101. What is that thing? Or maybe you're saying to yourself, oh, I remember what that is. Supply creates its own demand. No, it doesn't. Supply does not create its own demand. As my wife can tell you, we can walk into a supermarket, go past the canned vegetables aisle, find a can of canned beets. It was supplied, but I can tell you there's no demand from this guy for canned beets. I just ain't buying it. So you can provide all the supply you want. It isn't going to create demand. But that's not what Say's law was. You must master this concept for the entire course, which is what Say actually said. What Jean-Baptiste Say said was the act of producing a supply will generate enough demand in a closed economy to buy back everything that was produced. The act of producing a supply, well, what that does is when you produce a supply, you have to hire factors of production like labor, and then you got to pay them. So the act of producing a supply will create enough demand. That's the paychecks that go to the people who made the supply to buy back everything that was produced in a closed economy, meaning an economy that has no trade. That if you don't understand that, you could never understand the most important statistic in economics, which we will get to in a few minutes, which is GDP, which is all about Say's law. So that somebody just wrote this, is that part of the concept of a circular flow? You bet it is, and that's why slide number 4 in the deck that you're going to see has the circular flow diagram. So thank you, that was very perceptive. I congratulate you. Production possibilities frontiers. This tells you what's possible. What are we able to produce if everything is done right? If we don't waste anything, if we use all of our resources, if we use best known techniques. The mechanics of supply and demand. Ladies and gentlemen, no matter what you may have heard, the laws of supply and demand have not been repealed. There have been exceptions. Last year, the Saudis, in a hope of getting more revenue, increased the amount of oil that they put on the market for sale, and the price of oil went down. They said total revenue is price times quantity. I need more total revenue, so what I'll do is I'll reduce the price in the hope that it really jacks up the quantity. They were hoping that there was a high price elasticity of demand for oil. But what that did was effectively it said that the demand curve for Saudi oil was downward sloping instead of upward sloping. That lasted a short time. So there can be exceptions. But ladies and gentlemen, you can't understand this class at all if you don't understand supply and demand. If you don't understand why employment snaps back faster than wages do, then you don't understand supply and demand. So all this, look, is coming out of your Economics 101 class. And then next, the circular flow diagram, the single most important diagram in all of economics. But ladies and gentlemen, those who master the circular flow diagram, and I have one in here for you on a different slide, you master the circular flow diagram, you have mastered macroeconomics. Flat out. Everything is connected. All the sectors are connected. All the sectors affect one another. And just as importantly, ladies and gentlemen, there are two flows. There's a flow of goods and services and resources, and there's a flow of money, a financial thing. What the circular flow diagram reminds you is that there are two flows. There's a financial flow and an economic flow. And if you don't remember that, there's no way you could understand what happened in 2008 when the economy crashed. Two separate flows. The banking system went down. That's the financial flow. The stock markets crashed when the economy crashed, but those are two separate flows. And it wasn't until the economy got better that the financial sector got better, and vice versa. Two flows. So, best practice in macroeconomics, ladies and gentlemen, the best practice in macroeconomics is Master Your Economics 101 textbook. If you do that, you will be a superstar in this course. And it's as simple as that. So let's proceed. We will go faster tomorrow. A couple of things more. Economics is never a zero-sum game. There are always trade-offs, but there's always winners and losers. When I worked at the Fed, I was responsible for public information, and we would get letters from people praising us to pieces that we reduced interest rates so that now they could afford to buy a house and their student loans were cheaper and so forth. Great. We would get letters from people killing us for reducing interest rates. I'm a senior citizen. I keep my money in a bank account. Now the interest rates are so low, I can't live. Lower interest rates, praised by some. Lower interest rates, disdained by others. There are always winners. There are always losers. Next, economic policy always results in unintended consequences. You know, when the Fed sets its policy mix, it determines what interest rates it likes to have. It determines which securities it wants to buy and how many of them. It determines which special programs it wants to have to keep the economy strong. You know what? There are always going to be unintended consequences. Like, what happens when you set up a loan program through the Fed and the people who are borrowing money are not necessarily the people who need it? Unintended consequence. What happens when you reduce interest rates and some senior citizen says, "You've really hurt me"? Well, you reduce interest rates in order to encourage businesses and households to borrow, and in order, frankly, to make it cheaper for the federal government to finance its debt. Yeah, that's what you were intended to do. You weren't trying to hurt the senior citizen living in Fort Lauderdale or in Scottsdale, Arizona. You weren't trying to hurt them by making their bank accounts not so good because they're not getting good interest on their savings accounts. But you know what? You can't have everybody win from everything that happens, but some of it is unintended. What you really fear, ladies and gentlemen, is not the unintended. We know that there will always be winners and losers. What you fear is the unanticipated. What happens if you do something and it results in something happened and you said, wow, never thought that would be the consequence of that. Oh my goodness, that's not what anything we ever considered before. You know, we did the same kind of thing 20 different times over the past 3 decades. We never got that before. Why is it happening now? That's an unanticipated consequence. A good policymaker will always look at a decision tree and say, if we do this, here are the 10 most likely things that can happen. And you put a probability on each of those 10. What happens if number 11 happens? Something you never anticipated could, but it did. So this is what we have to watch as good macroeconomists. We want to set goals that are efficient, fair, stable, and promote growth. We want to have strong institutions, etc. So I'm not going to go through all of these. You could read these. I don't think any of these really needs a careful explanation. Here's a circular flow diagram, ladies and gentlemen, which of course is in your Economics 101. Whoops, let me go back. I'm sorry. Of course, it's in your Economics 101, and I'm sorry if it came out a little unclear. It's the process of scanning that made this difficult. But I've already made my point. Interconnectedness of the parts of the economy and the sectors and the industries, flows of goods and services and what they get paid going in one direction, financial flows and an entire financial system going as the second flow. what you pull out of this diagram is all of this, but never forget that there are two flows. This marriage between the sectors being interconnected, but also the marriage between the financial side of the economy and the real side of the economy, the economic side. So important. I guess I've been remiss on something. I'm really sorry for not stopping and asking any of you if you have any questions about the things I'm discussing. Please interrupt me orally. Please don't put them in chat. It's too hard for me to read them as I go. Just use your microphone and say, Professor or Steve or Malin or number 34. My wife is laughing. Or moronic professor. Why are you wearing that? I'm wearing that hat because I'm on chemotherapy and I lost all my hair. So, but I'm doing well. I'm doing well, so nothing to worry about. Please ask me questions. So I will formally ask you. Do you have any questions about anything I've said so far?
I did have a question.
Fantastic. Hi.
Hi,
Tell us your name.
Famia.
Thank you, Famia. How can I help you?
I was asking, when you were talking about there's always winners and losers and unintended consequences.
Yep.
My question was, does that apply to all economic policy or just capitalistic economic policy?
Always, all policy. Even if we were a socialist regime, let's pick a great case. The fastest growing, arguably maybe even the biggest economy in the world, in China. There is something of a private sector in China, but make no mistake about it, any business that's not minute really is very heavily influenced by the Communist Party. Now you can look at that and you can say, well, that's cool because you've got the whole weight of the Communist Party and the government behind you all the time. Yeah, but look at the consequences of what happens in terms of decision making, profitability, shareholder participation, decision making, standards. Look at that. Now you may consider that perhaps to be a loser. Maybe you consider that to be a loss. Others would look at it and say, state-owned enterprises are favorable to privately owned enterprises because you do have the full weight of the government behind you. So you will have winners and you will have losers from that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but in that sense, that means there's more of a moral ambiguity towards who the winners and losers are then, right?
Yes, right. You can anticipate, for the most part, who the winners and, I hate that word loser. I used it, but so I'll use it again. Who the winners and losers might be in everything that happens, but there's always going to be ambiguity in it. And guess what? Sometimes the winners and the losers are not 100% winners and losers. Suppose, for example, you have a small business and you need to borrow money and I reduce interest rates. You say, well, in order to expand my business, I need to borrow money. That's great. The interest rates have come down. That's cool. Suppose you are a family and you're looking to buy a house. Mortgage rates are at historic low levels. You go, you know what? Now I can finally afford to buy a house. Great. But suppose the same person who's looking to buy a house or to expand a business has another characteristic. That person is a saver. And that person is saying, I really love owning government bonds, but the interest rates are so low. Or I really like the safety of putting my money into a CD in the bank because I know that there's no capital loss there. It's protected by the FDIC. So the same person can win by going for a mortgage that's really cheap and then lose because that person likes to buy government bonds and the coupon or the return on that bond is really small. How ambiguous is that? So we all play multiple roles. It's hard to say that anyone really is 100% winner or 100% loser. And it's really hard to anticipate how people will respond to any of that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Thank you for your question. I'm grateful for it. We only have a couple of minutes left. Oh, no, we go until noontime. I'm sorry. So we have 20 minutes. Okay. So a standard approach to macroeconomic analysis. First thing, I always tell people, let me just back up. When I was at the Federal Reserve, I was responsible for working with the media. I was a media relations guy, among other things. And I always tell people when I watch people being interviewed, say on CNBC or Bloomberg or somewhere else, if they use the word think, if you hear someone say, so Dr. Mallon, what do you think is going to happen to the economy next year? And I say, well, what I think is going to happen is I turn off immediately. I don't want what you think. Every one of us has opinions. I want that interviewee to say, my model suggests, my research has shown, the facts are telling me. Every single one of you, and right now there are 82 of you on this call, every one of you has opinions. I don't want your opinion. I don't really care what you think. I want to know what you could document. I want you to show me facts. You know, the whole problem we've been having with the past administration, and I don't make terribly many political statements. I try not to do that. But the problem that they're having right now, because we've got a president who's been impeached, is he can say he thinks this election was stolen. Okay, that's great. But you know, he lost 61 out of 62 court cases because he didn't have any facts to show that it was stolen. So when you do your homework and you write answers to questions, your opinions, I really don't care what your opinion is. What I want to know is, what do you conclude based on the facts? So be careful when you hear someone say, I think, because they only say, I think, which is hedging, because they don't have the facts. My wife is a lawyer, and she would tell you that almost like the first day in law school, they teach you, when you have the facts, argue the facts. And when you don't have the facts, argue the law. Well, think about the impeachment trial right now. They don't have the facts, so they're arguing that impeaching Trump is unconstitutional. They're arguing the law. So if you don't have the facts, argue the law. If you have the facts, argue the facts. If you don't have the facts, argue the law. And if you don't have the facts or the law, pound the table. Be disruptive. January 6th at the Capitol. They didn't have the facts. They didn't have the law. So what did they do? They broke into the Capitol. They banged on the table. I want you as a thinker to argue the facts. The law is theory, but theory is just that. It's theory. Argue the facts. You can use theory, but don't pound the table and don't tell me what you think unless you've got the facts. Okay? Now, when I say you, I don't mean you as a student. I mean as a macroeconomic analyst of some sort. And that's how I compare the people on Wall Street or at the Fed or in government who I listen to. My colleagues out there, there are some of them, if I see them on TV, I stop what I'm doing, I grab a piece of paper and a pen and I start taking notes. And then there are others of them, they come on TV and I see them and I go, I can't learn anything. They are the motto people, M-O-T-T-O, masters of the terribly obvious. And don't learn anything from them. Okay? So, enough said. And I would just remind you, this is just an introductory, this is just an introductory class. As we go forward, the class is not going to be quite this way. We will be looking at theory. So here's where we start to get into what the course is about. If you're in macroeconomics, this is really the only question that matters. What is economic growth and why does it matter? And it matters because even a small change in economic growth has an enormous influence on standards of living of countries years later. It's a compound, sort of a compound interest concept. And I gave you an article to read about the importance of compounding, by the way. It's on Blackboard. You know, there's a rule of 72. Some people call it the rule of 70. It doesn't really matter. So suppose it's the rule of 72. If something is growing at 2% a year, money will double in 36 years. 36 years. If something is growing only 1%, money will double in 72 years. Well, by then, in 72 years, if you grew at 2%, your money is 4 times as large. 1 percentage point difference. Because your money doubled in 36 years, and then it doubles again in the next 36 years if you're at 2%. But if you're at 1%, your money doubles in 72 years. Well, at 2%, 72 years down the road, you have 4 times as much money. Your $100 became $400. Oh my goodness. So we look at growth because growth matters. And so when we look at one of the great economic miracles of the second half of the 20th century and into the 21st century, it's the growth of China. The fact that China was growing consistently originally at around 9%, then it dropped to 6 to 7 and 8, and now China is growing, no one really knows, at 4.5 or 5%, where the United States is growing at 2%, under 3% on a sustained basis. Wow, you can see why they caught up so fast. Really makes a difference. Growth matters. And when you have economic growth, the definition of economic growth is that your GDP grew. And if your GDP grew, it means your output grew. And due to Say's law, if your output grew, your income grew at exactly the same rate. Because with Say's law, the act of production produces enough demand to buy back everything that was produced. So it makes a big difference. So if you don't think it matters whether or not someone gets a 2% raise or a 4% raise, you go, oh, it's only 2%. Ladies and gentlemen, it matters a lot. Modern economic growth, take a look at this. We really figured out how to make economies grow in the 20th century, and we're really good at it in the 21st century. And that explains why 25 years from now, we're going to be talking about economic giants that go way beyond China. You're going to be talking about Indonesia. You're going to be talking about Philippines, Vietnam, Nigeria, maybe South Africa. If Brazil could ever get out of its own way, you'd be talking about Brazil. Of course, Brazil never gets out of its own way, so we don't have to worry about that. Mexico, these are countries that are mastering the keys to modern real economic growth, and they will be catching up with Europe and North America. They won't completely catch up, but they will be catching up. And who will be the leaders for the next 50 years? The countries I just mentioned will have the fastest growth, and the biggest economies will be, yes, North America, yes, South Korea, yes, Japan and China. But those other countries are going to be catching up because they're going to be growing much faster. China's real economic growth rate cannot continue at a 6% rate. They can't generate enough jobs to keep putting people to work that way. And no matter how much the government might try to support them, it's impossible. They can't do it. They'll be growing slower. But Indonesia, which is one of the largest populations in the world, Philippines, Vietnam, a small country, they're going to be catching up. One of the great phenomena of the next 50 years will be how the middle class is going to be growing all over the world. And what do middle class people want? They want houses, which generate a lot of real economic growth. They want cars, and the cars that we're going to be creating are going to be electric cars, and that's very exciting. And we're going to be getting rid of the fleet of internal combustion engines around the world, and we're going to have autonomous vehicles, and it's going to be phenomenal. And you get countries like the United States that somehow, because of the way its economic system is structured, just continues to grow at a very stable 2 to 3% rate year in and year out, absorbing more and more labor and keeping its unemployment rate by world standards very low. It's just remarkable. So what is growth? I'm sorry that this came out. This is clear in terms of what you see on Blackboard, but when you do equations in the medium we're using now, Collaborate Ultra, it fouls up equations. But this just tells you how to calculate growth rates. And we'll come back to that at another moment. It's just a set of mathematical equations. And this makes it clear what we're talking about. It's all about trying to figure out how we are expanding our production, which means by definition we are expanding our income. Say's law. The act of producing creates enough income to buy back that which is bought. But what we do as a standard, as economists, is look at data in terms of annualized rates of change. And so I would address your attention to the equation at the bottom. If we were to compare the GDP in the, let's do it this way, in the second quarter of 2020 with the GDP in the first quarter of 2020, all we would need to do is take the newer number, the second quarter number, and divide it by the older number, which is the first quarter number. That would give us 1 point something, 01 something, whatever it turns out to be. But because these are quarterly data, we express GDP at an annualized rate. So what we are effectively saying is, okay, if you take that change from quarter to quarter and you say, let's say that that change were to go on for 4 quarters and not 1 quarter, you would be doing effectively a compounding of growth. So you raise it to the 4th power. And then to just see in very plain terms what the growth rate would be, you subtract 1 and multiply by 100. It's very simple. The reason I show it to you this way is that if you go into Excel and you put in this equation, you will get the growth rates. And you'll notice that it starts with 3 open parentheses, but if you look through the equation, you'll see that there are 3 closed parentheses. Again, we will come back to this and you will work with this some more. What I will do is just look at one more slide and then we'll finish this and then we'll reconvene on Wednesday. And this again is just another way of looking at what I just showed you. In your textbook, they refer to the growth as G with a bar over it. Bar because it's effectively the result of a mathematical process. This is what we're dealing with. What I would recommend that you do is start, if you haven't, because I've already asked you to do it prior to the class, read the materials that I've given you. We will probably stay with this particular PowerPoint presentation at least into Monday. So we will use it Wednesday and use the final part of this probably next Monday. Start to look at what I've asked you to read. Start to dabble in some of the questions that I've asked and see where it takes you. This is all very introductory stuff. And before we get into detail about GDP and what it tells us and what its components are about, which is really the essence of this course, think about how you would calculate growth rates, annualized. And if you could master that, then we'll start to play with some of the data as the semester goes forward, all on an Excel spreadsheet. So my final thing to just say over again is, you must, capital letters, bold type, underlined, you must have on your computer access to Microsoft Word, because all 3 exams must be turned into me as a Word document. If you're not familiar as to how to use Word or how to mail a Word document, then I would tell you start practicing, because your first exam pops up like in just a few weeks. So start practicing. It's not complicated. It's not difficult. I will give you answer sheets, part of a Word document, and you will send it back to me as a Word document. So I will end here, take any final questions you might have, and we'll call it a day.
Professor, I just have one question. For the questions that are on Blackboard under assignments, do we need to answer them for Wednesday?
It would be good if you do.
Okay.
Now, let me just back up for a moment, okay? Normally, we will be going over homeworks on a Wednesday. I like to do homeworks on Wednesdays, so Wednesday is homework day. But since we're just starting, I guess the answer to your question is we'll probably be getting to those homeworks next week. So we probably won't do much homework, if anything, this coming Wednesday. But normally Wednesday is homework day.
Okay.
I
And
hope that
if
clears
we
it
want
up.
to submit it, we can submit it.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
But again,
But
I'm not going to grade it. I'm not going to comment on it. I will only make note of the fact that you did that. Okay?
Got it. Thank you.
Again, homework is for you. It's not for me. Okay?
Professor,
Yes, sir.
can you hear me? Can you
Yeah,
use
yeah.
the fourth edition of the book?
Yes.
We can use fourth edition?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Now, a lot of people have fourth editions either because they got them from friends or because they took the course before and unfortunately they were unable to get a passing grade. The fourth edition is similar. It's different from the fifth edition, no doubt, but it's very similar. Textbooks are expensive, and I don't want to put you through that. If you have a fourth edition, that's good enough. Okay? So let me tell you what an honor and privilege it is for me to work with you this way. Thank you to everyone who asked questions and participated. Thank you to all of those who have been in the class today. I hope that you will continue to be with us long after the 3 weeks have passed and that the course turns out to be everything you want it to be. And if we're going forward and we're somewhere in the middle of the semester and you're disappointed by what I've done and how I'm handling the class, tell me, okay? I want this to be yours. We have students who are taking this course from halfway around the world. We have students who are taking this course from right by the Queens College campus. So we've got all kinds of issues. Don't be afraid to tell me when things are not going well, and we'll make any accommodation we can for you, okay? Bless you, folks. Take care, stay healthy, and let's meet again on Tuesday.
Thank you, Professor.
I'm sorry, on Wednesday. I'm sorry. You're very welcome. Bye-bye.
I have a question, Professor.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, sure.
I have
Your
a question.
Go ahead, your question.
Okay, so when is your office hour?
Just tell me when you want to talk to me. We can't have office hours. I don't have an office. So if you say to me, hey, Steve, I need to chat with you about something, we'll set up a time to talk.
How do I set
Let's
up
be
that?
friends. That's the easiest way to do it, right?
Yeah, okay, but how do I set that up?
Just tell me. Send me a message. You have
Can
my
I
email
email
address.
you?
I gave you my phone number. Send me a message and say, hey, Steve, we need to talk. Okay?
No, like it's
You
not for
have my
now. Like
email.
in the future, if I need, I'm asking for
It's
that.
in the syllabus. It's in the syllabus.
Why you
There's a
always
contact information in the
lying?
syllabus.
Why you always lying? Stop lying. Why you always lying? Why you always lying? Why
Okay, one more question, Professor.
stop
Yes.
Okay, so
lying?
Okay, so what's your question?
okay, so how do I see the recording of classes?
There's an icon that you can click on when you get into Blackboard Collaborate Ultra, and you can see all the recordings.
Yeah, if you press the what you call three dashed lines on top left corner, it will show you what you call the recordings and also other things. So just press on the recordings, it will just pop up for that day.
And you'll be recording every class, right?
Yeah. And to the person who said I'm a clown, I'm going to show you what kind of a clown I am as this course proceeds. I said that one of my requirements for this class is that you be polite. You're not polite, then I will not be polite. That's uncalled for. It's not acceptable. I don't accept you being called a clown by a student, and I don't accept students calling each other a clown. So that has to stop. And it better stop immediately.